So I had to make that video part one, and this is part two. Just because you can tell in the video, there's just maybe two spots where I actually forget what I'm gonna say next. I'm like, and like I'm fumbling through my head, and then right when I click to publish it or not publish it, but where it starts uploading or whatever, I'm like, oh damn it, that's what I was gonna say. So, two more things on those goddamn Native Americans. Not something I say, but a sentiment that I think the very elitist people who think they're educated than everybody else, certainly more than the working class or anybody who, well, it's just not them, feels. Not my sentiment. I remember hearing in sociology class, sociology, yes, sociology class I took in college, um, how the Native Americans had such a progressive view of marriage. All a Indian Native American woman needed to do was just move out of the man's tent, take her belongings out of his tent, they were divorced. That was it. Okay, let's just say that's true. Um, and using Native Americans, I guess, even let's be conservative about that in their liberal use, and say all indigenous peoples north of the Rio Grande. Which, yeah, that might have been a few tribes, or I don't know, but I doubt that that was something pan cultural in the continent. But okay, even if that was, um, so these people who got together, had children, uh, depended on each other for the survival of them and their children and their existence in their culture. Uh, Such a frivolous event. It probably wasn't frivolous like any type of marriage contract in any civilization in on the planet Earth. It probably meant a lot more than just, oh, I'm taking my things and just gonna move out and go with somebody else. Yeah, of course we know about how they get wives if they can take them away from somebody, kind of like Spartan. If you can take, if you can take your wife, if you can take it away from survival of the strongest. Um, but there were tribes that didn't have ethics like that, like the Cherokee and the Chickasaw. And if they used that, it probably wasn't as light and frivolous. Like I remember, what was that? There was a step-by-step episode. Remember that shitty show with who's his name, Richard Grieco or John Stamos, and they had this thing where this stupid Greek kid or whatever asks one of the dumb blonde girls to walk around a table with him, and then they're married. Well, that's basically mocking and making a caricature out of when the Orthodox actually the during the crowning service actually walk around the altar in the sanctuary of God, which it's not a table. I guess a Westerner might see it as a table if it was in Russian church or something like that, made out of wood. Um, but yeah, effectively that's what they do. But that's not what marries them, or that I mean that just that act doesn't, just viewing it as that as an empty gesture and then saying, oh well, that's how they do it in Greece. That's is the I mean, it's the most comical caricature way of it's an insult, plain and simple. Which I think basically is how what they tried to describe as Native American divorce to us. I think it's insulting, and of course, none of us can understand the Native American culture, not even their own descendants, unfortunately, because that environment, that world is entirely gone. Also, again, getting back to the strongest thing, I remember Billy Graham. in his book The Holy Spirit, he tells a story of a young, which it is an actual Cheyenne parable or whatever, where a boy goes to this creek where men would, you know, talk about their fears and feelings, and you know, uh, or having mercy or whatever, and he finds out, and then the boy gets stoned or something like that, or drowned. But yeah, I do know that it was, at least for the Plains Indians, common that, or just the matter of fact that compassion, mercy, and weakness were the same thing, and they were not tolerated. Again, if you're living out on the plain, basically survival of the fittest, uh, pre-Columbian society, and you have enemy tribes all around you, compassion and weakness wind up being the same thing, and they don't tolerate it. And if you cry, they'll kill you. I know that the Algonquin Indians, because I actually know a lot about the Algonquin Indians and the Powhatan, not Powhatan, Powhatan. Anyways, the guy's name wasn't Powhatan; it was Wahunchnacock. Powhatan was actually area that he was from, Great Algonquin. But I'm not going to get into that. The fact that I know a lot about the Virginia Native Americans. Uh, if you screamed out in pain, they'd torture you more, because they thought, well, we have right. If you show, while they're killing you or torturing you, if you show any sign of you're in pain or crying or beg for mercy, they get disgusted, and they, as fun, will torture you a hell of a lot worse. And actually, that was pretty common for the Native Americans of North America. And compassion and weakness and crying were all the same thing. They were to be looked down upon, hated. It's your fault, because you had to survive from your own will. It was different. When these people, when the white elitists try to project onto the Native Americans, well, they were peaceful and did this, and they weren't anything like the Europeans. They take their humanist values, which they've hijacked from Christianity, and just left God out of the equation, and said, well, since that's what we know is the best, that we, that everybody knows is the best, which is blatant, what is it, imperialist ideas, or the unclean masses, and the great white hope, um, that's how Native Americans had to be, because that's what's good, and they couldn't have been bad. I mean, they couldn't have, that's, if they would act like that, then maybe, those Christian missionaries might have been right of civilization. So I mean, they wind up doing all this thing as if there's this standard for good. Uh, they don't want to have these absolute standards of right and wrong, good and bad. Okay, the Bible and Christianity, let's just say Western culture, not to be, just to break up the political correctness of all this. And then, I mean, really, you can't tell somebody, well, weakness, somebody crying, expressing their feelings, or having mercy on somebody is a bad thing or negative thing. To think that is wrong. You can't say that. You've taken that off the table. And in fact, how many Native Americans survived was by the tomahawk. That's how it was. You don't blame these people for it. You don't say, oh, well, that, and say their culture's nothing, or that we need to forget their culture or erase their culture. That's what it was. And if white people have a problem with that, if that makes them feel uncomfortable, well, they can go fuck themselves. Sorry, but that's really it. And when the colonists came over here and they said, yeah, we're not putting up with that shit, and child sacrifice and all this other crap. No, it ends right now. If you feel that maybe they were right in saying that, well, maybe everything's not so black and white. Maybe there are gray areas. Maybe when the Spanish hit the island where the Caribs were keeping the Arawak Indian women, they were raping them so they could bring the pregnancy to almost full term, rip open their bellies, and then feast on the uh, preborn infant fetus as a delicacy. They got so disgusted that they say, "That's it. We're destroying this. We're No more. They're not even allowed their own damn language. It's so repulsive to us. You could kind of sympathize with the Spanish seeing that kind of horror and torture, because the Spanish did have limits, whereas it was survival of the fittest in many cases in places like this, because there was no big government, there was no religion, there was nothing to tell them. There was basically Stone Age peoples, which, yes, the people in Europe that were basically at the same technology as the Native Americans were in pre-Columbian times, we would call Stone Age anywhere in Africa, Europe, or Asia, but it's politically incorrect to say it over here. Uh, Again, I state all this stuff as just matter-of-fact stuff because I don't look down on the Native Americans. I don't look at their culture with, oh, we have to apologize for it, or they do. It's sickening. So this is part 2, and I think that'll be enough. Peace to you. And is there any people out there who have Native American ancestry? Be proud. They were strong people. You're the descendants of the survivors. But then again, we all are the descendants of survivors, so we can all be proud of our ancestry, no matter how much bloodshed was in our past. Peace.